We go out in stormy weather. We rarely practice discern. We make love to some weird sin. We seek out the taciturn.
So what does it mean to go 5150?
To go 5150 is when someone's psyche reaches a point of instability and they can't live with themselves or the people around them without being a threat.
Would you say you've come close to going 5150?
I can say I have, probably when I was 14, going on to 15 my freshman year of high school.
This is Jacob Rayner. He's been one of my closest friends throughout high school and continues to be to this day. Jacob and I have a very special friendship. We like to pull all kinds of crazy stunts.
I want it that way. Tell me why ain't nothing but a heartache.
Jacob has experienced a fair share of sucky life events, just like we all have. Except, actually, I'd say Jacob has experienced more than a fair share.
I don't need to ask you any questions. You can just go ahead and say what you want to say.
All right. So,
There's a serious medical condition affecting many teens. So serious that it can lead to suicide.
Doctors, psychologists, and therapists are treating teens for depression and anxiety at a greater rate than ever before.
And according to research, teens say anxiety and depression are the most critical issues among their peers.
my upbringing was a lot different. I was born with not a lot of money to my name. I was born with a inflammatory disease called ulcerative colitis in my colon, which then ultimately led to a divorce eventually with my parents. And then I ended up moving states twice, and I think that's probably where my depression had started and my anxiety.
Life. In general, it is like a roller coaster. It's a phrase that we heard a lot as kids and growing up and even throughout adulthood. It's a phrase that we think is tacky, especially younger on, but it's a phrase that's very true. As teenagers and young adults, we tend to only focus on how our life is at a particular moment. We focus on the smaller things so much more than we should. Honestly, even as we grow up, that's still the truth. We spend so much time worrying about little, insignificant things that won't matter at all come the next week. But there are some things that happen in each and every one of our lives that aren't little and aren't insignificant. In fact, there's many things that happen in each and every one of our lives that are very significant. Life really is like a roller coaster, though. We experience many up and down moments. One second, we might be riding high, feeling like we're on top of the world and that nothing could possibly bring us down. Quickly, though, this feeling is stolen as we become wiped down suddenly and unexpectedly, causing us to desperately grab for dear life. To get through these down moments, whether significant or insignificant, we cope.
Just recently, my mother passed away back in April from a blood disease and heart failure because of that. And it's been a hard thing to cope with as I've gone along throughout this year of 2020 with COVID and, the passing of my mother and going off to college for my first semester. Well, I also am the oldest of 5 other siblings, 3 of which I watched over the summer for my stepdad. It was a whole hard transition, and
There is an infinite number of reasons as to why we cope. Way too many to possibly name. To narrow it down, the reasons we cope can be categorized into 3 main categories. Those 3 categories are stress, depression, and tragedy. The first of these categories is stress. Stress among teenagers and young adults is caused mainly by the pressures of everyday life, like trying to balance school, work, sports, social life, and much more. High expectations also play a big role in causing stress, as sometimes parents and mentors of teens place incredibly high expectations on them, ultimately hurting them much more than any benefit gained. Depression can be attributed to factors such as loneliness, which is at an all-time high among teens in 2020 just due to COVID restrictions and impacts. anxiety, caused by similar factors that create stress like high expectations, but also wanting to fit in is a big contributor for causing anxiety. Social media has exploded this. Teens' self-esteem can be impacted from something as simple as their Instagram photo not getting enough likes. Tragedy is caused mainly by loss. Loss doesn't directly have to relate to death. Although death is a leading factor for causing tragedy, loss in general is impactful. Whether we lose a friend, a job, or an opportunity, these can all be considered tragedies and warrant coping. Tragedy doesn't just have to relate to big issues, it can be something as small as misspelling a word. Within these categories are an infinite number of ways and reasons as to why we cope. This is Sam Simmons, another one of my best friends. Similar to Jacob, Sam has also experienced more than a fair share of sucky life events.
So August 2nd of 2019, I got in a really bad car accident. Someone just pulled out in front of me and I had nowhere to go. Long story short, I broke the radius of my wrist, tore both the labrums in each shoulder, and I tore all the cartilage out of my wrist as well at the time. So they put me in the ambulance, took me to the hospital, loaded me up with a bunch of drugs, and they just put me in a big sling for my wrist, and I was pretty immobilized because my whole body was just sore. I had burns all down my arm right here from the airbag chemicals. Felt like a different world almost, it really did, like when I woke up the next day. It didn't really hurt me mentally then. Obviously I was really sad about losing the car and breaking my wrist and having some shoulder pain, but I didn't know the road ahead that I had of recovery at the time. I really thought I had just broken my wrist.
All too often do we get hung up and cope with insignificant problems that when a drastic, major event occurs, we only tend to cope using much more drastic methods, since the methods we have been using for smaller events are almost worn out in a way. Sam and I needed something to provide relief from the ongoing troubles in our lives. Sure, things could always be a lot worse, but I've always found that to be a stupid saying. By saying things can be worse, it's almost as if you're making the actual problem seem insignificant. An argument I'm making is that it's okay to cope with the problems of life even if they aren't very significant. It's just the way we cope that we have to be careful of. If you're not careful, you can find yourself using small life problems as an excuse to resort to negative coping methods. Sam told me about how he once took a spontaneous trip to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. He claimed it was a great temporary escape from reality, a great and healthy way to cope. I think it's safe to say that most teens and young adults are having a hard time with finding healthy, good ways to cope, especially right now in 2020. We really just kinda said screw it and last minute decided to take a trip. With Sam's experience, we figured that it would be a great escape from reality. Today is Friday, October 23rd. It's 3:14 p.m. and I'm in Sam's neighborhood. I'm getting ready to pick him up. We're gonna go on a trip today. We don't even really know where to, and we really don't even know who all's going, but we're going on a trip today. This is literally the definition of teenage planning. Like, absolutely no planning. We're leaving in a couple hours. We're doing this. It'll turn out good. It'll be a good time. You ready to do this?
Let's go.
Something that is true to each and every one of us is that we all in a way live multiple lives. Over the past few decades, as advancements with the internet seem to accelerate more and more year after year, the opportunities for each of us to have multiple lives have grown drastically. We tend to only share the glamorous things that happen in our lives. Although sometimes over-exaggerated, we always end up posting the stuff that we want others to see, never any of the behind-the-scenes stuff.
'Cause we're all just broken people and we don't know why. But we're keeping it together 'cause we gotta try. 'Cause we're all just broken people and we don't know why. But we're keeping it together 'cause we gotta try.
We spend most of our teenage life planning and dreaming of these amazing things that we want to do, but we actually never really end up doing it. This same reasoning applies to the in-person aspects of life. Just because someone who you work with, go to school with, or even live with and see every day seems fine from the outside, doesn't always mean that they really are. In fact, in most cases where someone isn't fine, it's not entirely obvious from an outsider's view. Both Sam and I were in desperate need for something new, something exciting. After all, Sam was still dealing with the effects of his car crash over a year ago, and I was just fed up with online school and having nothing to do. It felt as if we approached a dead end. We needed something to relieve us from that.
Look good? That's it.
Hello, this is Judy with Cherry Hotel. How can I help you today?
We'd like to book for tonight and tomorrow night.
Okay, yeah, you have to be 18 years or over with a valid ID with a credit card or debit card under your name.
We got that. That sounds good.
And you said it's coming in tonight, sir?
Tonight and tomorrow
For 2
night.
nights.
2 nights total. So tonight and tomorrow night for three
Okay.
people.
Okay. All right, so I do have that reservation for you for the Drury Inn and Suites, Knoxville West in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi guys, it's Amelia talking to you. Welcome back to my channel. So basically, if you don't know, I do online school. I'm not enjoying it either. I hate it. But my mom recently told me like a couple weeks ago I have to do online for the rest of the school year. I'm not looking forward to it.
My college experience was severely lacking, to say the least. I mean, I feel like the college staff, they tried, but they really just fell short of almost every measure they could possibly have done in order to make students feel involved or part of something bigger than themselves on campus. 95% of my time was spent in my solo dorm room doing these practically useless online assignments.
Escapism. Escapism is the way I've been coping with things, so video games and guitar.
It's basically, I'm just like trying to develop new coping skills. Lately, I've been, you know, playing guitar and piano.
And I also started playing guitar over last summer. Now, it was something I had thought about for a long time. And I kind of just woke up one morning on a weekend and was like, you know what, I want to play guitar.
Really, the main way I was able to cope with it was just, ironically, the main problem of everything being online was also sort of my coping mechanism, just talking with friends online, trying to get involved as much as I could there.
I can't tell you how good I've gotten at some of my video games. It's kind of scary how many hours I put into them just to reach a point of where I'm at.
What I really found to help was hanging out with friends, being optimistic about the future as well. That's a big one. I read a lot of books on finances as well during this time because I had never had so much free time before. And you have to do something or you will go crazy.
There really are an infinite number of ways we cope. Coping methods can be classified as either good or bad, and in most cases, it's pretty obvious to distinguish which ones are good and which are bad. But it seems that the easiest methods aren't really the best methods. Both sleeping a lot and sleeping not at all are commonly done actions while coping. Both of these methods are easy to do, but not all that good for you. It's not at all easy to seek support, but it's very easy to hide from support. I bet you can guess which of these methods is good and which is bad. But the lines between what's right and what's wrong often become blurred. In many cases, there is no definite answer. We all cope differently. We all have our go-to methods. For me, I like to eat a lot. I don't typically try and change my coping methods, and most people are the same way. Humans don't really like change. Coping pushes us to give in sometimes. We all want to have a place in this world. We all want to fit in. You can claim that you don't care about that stuff, but deep down, a little part of you always does. When you are experiencing a down moment, you are also the most vulnerable to make a mistake. After all, you're probably thinking, what do I have to lose? All this makes coping tough, confusing, and downright sucky. We all have our go-to methods, and like I said, once we find those go-tos, we don't really try and change them. And when we do try something new, it's usually a result of giving in. All right, so now it is 6:04 p.m., almost 3 hours after we started planning this. And we're going to Knoxville, Tennessee. It's about a 5.5-hour drive from here. Hopefully it's not too bad, straight on the highway. But the goal is to go see the Smoky Mountains, to get out of central Ohio and go somewhere that's pretty, all the fall colors, and just enjoy the scenery down there and get away from reality. We're at Corbin's house. We're getting him now. It is 7:31 p.m. About 4 hours after we planned this, we're getting ready to drive 384 miles to Knoxville, Tennessee. Let's get on the road. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I used to have one too, maybe you'll come and have a look. I really love
Cincinnati, baby.
Yeah, I'm glad
Cincy.
you like mine too. See, we're looking pretty cool. Get ya. So what do you tell? Oh yeah, I wait tables too. No, I haven't heard your band, 'cause you guys are pretty new, but if you did.
It's 12:22 in the morning. We have 103 miles to go. Looks like we get there about, hopefully, 1:40-ish. It's a light drizzle. It's been raining on and off. We're about, I'd say, 45 minutes from the border, the state border.
Something like that.
Something like that, so.
Like you, yeah, I like you, and I feel,
We are 64 miles away from our destination in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's 12:56 a.m. We just crossed over into the state of Tennessee. For me, late night drives are my favorite way to cope. Since March, I've put over 24,000 miles on my car. Now I suppose this is the point in the movie where I'm supposed to come to a conclusion, or in this case, make an argument. An argument on what really is the best way to cope. This is a question that I've spent weeks trying to find an answer to. And I've come to find that the best way to cope has absolutely nothing to do with action, but rather, mindset. I've repeatedly said that everyone copes differently, and that's the truth. However, there is one thing that we can all do to help us while coping, despite our many differences in the ways we cope. Something that doesn't get talked about much is the idea of catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is done when we trick ourselves into believing if we expect the worst, we can prevent it. This is a silent but deadly method of coping for many of us. In fact, I'm confident in saying this is a coping mindset that we are all guilty of. After all, seeing the worst invites the worst. In order to reshape all of our coping methods to become beneficial, we need to find a healthy, positive mindset that discourages catastrophizing. The way we can do that is to stop thinking about the result, the what-if scenarios, but instead to think about the process. For example, Let's say you have a big test coming up tomorrow that you're totally unprepared for. Typically, we would just catastrophize and accept failure, saying, I know I'm going to fail this. But instead of thinking about the what-if worst-case scenario, think about the process. What can I do to better prepare myself, even though this exam is tomorrow? Thinking about the process helps us set little goals that we can work towards, little goals that contribute to our big goal. The road to recovery is shitty, but it's a process. The way to cope with that process is to embrace it and set little goals. Have a good mindset and don't focus on the what-ifs, focus on the hows. The how will I get to this little goal? How will I achieve this feeling? It will help tremendously. It has with myself. I promise you that. On the morning of Saturday, October 24th, less than 24 hours after we planned this trip, we were at last in Knoxville, Tennessee. Alright, day 2, 53 more miles till Gatlinburg. We're going to see the goddamn Smoky Mountains. Let's do it.
Now I'm home at last. Feels like couldn't you begin? Sour in my head, laying on my bed, losing all my sense of feeling. Self-doubt lingers on my fingers. Wish I could escape into you. Holding on to things I sat through, missing what the others abuse. I don't want this wave to stop, 'cause forever isn't long enough. I don't want this wave to stop. Oh, it's over now. It's over now.
Although this trip only provided a temporary relief, it sure as hell was a good one. Every single teenager and young adult you saw in this video was told to try a change in mindset when it came to coping, all of which reported positive results. No matter what your age is, next time you're coping, change your mindset. You won't believe what actually happens.
Wish I could escape into you. Prism cracking, dancing, slapping, leaving me with nothing to lose. I don't want this wave to stop, 'cause forever isn't long enough. I don't want this wave to stop. Oh, it's over now. It's over now.
So now that this movie's almost done, there's a piece of advice I want to add on to the end, because I think it's something that everybody should hear. A lot of people don't understand this. It took me a while to understand this, and it has to do with the balance of relationships. I think all too often do we as humans get hung up with putting so much time, effort, and energy into somebody, and they just don't do the same in return, and it hurts us. It's a leading factor as to why we cope, because we face the question of, do they still care about us? Do they still love us? And like I said, it took me a long time to understand this. If you're putting in a lot of time, energy, and effort into somebody, and they're just not doing the same in return, it's not worth it, and quite frankly, you deserve better. And that's why it's so important that there needs to be an equal level of effort from both sides, because if there's not, you're just gonna end up getting hurt. And when you get hurt, you cope.